If we look at this paranoid delusional system, Stalin was in power for 30 years. He is, many argue, one of the most powerful men in history. Did, in his case, absolute power corrupt him, or did it reveal the true nature of the man? And maybe just in your sense, as we kind of build around this genocide of the early 1930s, this paranoid delusional system, did it get built up over time? Was it always there? It's kind of a question of did the genocide, was that always inevitable essentially in this man, or did power create that?
I mean, it's a great question, and I don't think you can. I don't think you can say that it was always kind of inherent in the man. I mean, the man without his position and without his power, wouldn't have been able to accomplish what he eventually did in the way of murdering people, and murdering groups of people, which is what genocide is. So, I don't, it wasn't sort of in him. I mean, and again, the new research has shown that, he had, his childhood was, not a particularly nasty one. I mean, people used to say, the father beat him up, and it turns out actually it wasn't the father, it was the mother once in a while. But basically, he was not an unusual young Georgian kid or student even. And it was the growth of the Soviet system and him within the Soviet system. I mean, his own development within the Soviet system, I think that led, to the kind of mass killing that occurred in the 1930s. He essentially achieved complete power by the early 1930s. And then as he rolled with it, as you would say, or people would say, it increasingly became murderous. And there was no, there were no checks and balances, obviously, on that murderous system. And not only that, people supported it in the NKVD and elsewhere. He learned how to manipulate people. I mean, he was a superb political manipulator of those people around him. And, we've got new transcripts, for example, of Politburo meetings in the early 1930s. And you read those things and he uses humor and he uses sarcasm, especially. He uses verbal ways to undermine people, to control their behavior and what they do. And he's a really, he's a real, I guess, manipulator is the right word. And he does it with, a kind of skill that on the one hand is admirable. And on the other hand, of course, is terrible because it ends up, creating the system of terror that he creates.
I mean, I guess just to linger on it, I just wonder how much of it is a slippery slope. In the early 1920s, did he think he was going to be murdering even a single person, but thousands and millions? I just wonder, maybe the murder of a single human being just to get them, because you're paranoid about them potentially threatening your power. Does that murder then open a door? And once you open the door, you become a different human being. A deeper question here is the Solzhenitsyn, the line between good and evil runs in every man. Are all of us, once we commit one murder in this situation, does that open a door for all of us? And I guess even the further deeper question is how easy it is for human nature to go onto the slippery slope that ends in genocide.
There are a lot of questions in those questions, and the slippery slope question I would answer, I suppose, by saying, Stalin wasn't the most likely successor of Lenin. There were plenty of others. There were a lot of political contingencies that emerged in the 1920s that made it possible for Stalin to seize power. I don't think of him as if you would just know him in 1925, I don't think anybody would say, much less himself, that this was a future mass murderer. I mean, Trotsky mistrusted him and thought he was a mindless bureaucrat. Others were less mistrustful of him. But, he managed to gain power in the way he did through this bureaucratic and political maneuvering that was very successful. The slippery slope, as it were, doesn't really begin until the 1930s, in my view. In other words, once he gains complete power and control of the Politburo, once the programs that he institutes of the 5-year plan and collectivization go through, once he reverses himself and is able to reverse himself or reverse the Soviet path, to give various nationalities their ability to develop their own cultures and sort of internal politics. Once he reverses all that, you have the Ukrainian famine in 32, 33. You have the murder of Kirov, who is one of the leading figures, in the political system. You have the suicide of his wife. You have all these things come together in 32, 33 that then, make it more likely, in other words, that bad things are going to happen. And people start seeing that, too, around him. They start seeing that it's not a slippery slope. It's a dangerous situation which is emerging, and some people really understand that. So I really do see a differentiation then between the 20s. I mean, it's true that Stalin during the Civil War, there's a lot of good research on that, shows that he already had some of these characteristics of being, as it were, murderous and being dictatorial and pushing people around and that sort of thing. That was all there. But I don't really see that as kind of the necessary stage for the next thing that came, which was the 30s, which was really terror of the worst sort, where everybody's afraid for their lives, and most people are afraid for their lives and their families' lives, and where torture and that sort of thing becomes a common part, of what people had to face. So it's a different world. And people will argue. They'll argue this kind of Lenin-Stalin continuity debate. That's been going on since I was an undergraduate, right? That argument, was Stalin the natural sort of next step from Lenin, or was he something completely different? Many people will argue, because of Marxism-Leninism, because of the ideology, that it was a kind of natural next step. I don't think so. I would tend to lean the other way. Not absolutely. I mean, I won't make an absolute argument that what Stalin became had nothing to do with Lenin and nothing to do with Marxism-Leninism. It had a lot to do with it. But he takes it one major step further. And again, that's why I don't like the slippery slope metaphor, because that means it's kind of slow and easy. Yeah. It's a leap. Yeah. And we call, historians talk about the Stalin revolution, in 28 and 29, that he in some senses creates a whole new system, through the 5-year plan, collectivization, and seizing political power the way he does.